Yearning for Moshiach, episode 6. And what's so terrible if I don't long for the Geula? Let's be honest. Is it so terrible not to long for the Geula? After all, isn't the Geula for our benefit? So if we don't care so much about it, that's our problem, isn't it? Yeah, when we look in Chazal, that's not what we find at all. The Gemara in Shabbos tells us that when a person is brought to judgment in the next world, he is asked a series of questions. Among them, did he conduct his business affairs in good faith? Did he set aside time to learn Torah regularly? And was he yearning for the redemption? While the first two are quite understandable as they speak to the heart of how the person lived his life, what's not so clear is why yearning for the Geula falls into the same category. It must be that yearning for Geula is not merely a matter of personal preference, but an obligation that is reflective of how the person lived his life. Why? As I elaborated on in the previous episode, being that Yetzias Mitzraim is in many ways the template for the Geula Shlema, the obvious place to look for the answer begins in Egypt, some 3,300 years ago. The Medrash tells us that Hashem brought Choshech, the plague of darkness, upon the Mitzrim, because there were Jews in that generation who were Rishoyim, wicked people. Why? Because they didn't want to leave Mitzrayim. Though Hashem needed to kill them for their evil, at the same time, He wanted to protect their dignity, so He did it under the cover of darkness. But this answer is problematic, because when we think about it, even for a moment, we realize that the mere suggestion that the Jews didn't want to leave Mitzrayim seems preposterous for two reasons. First of all, the Jewish people were eyewitness to 10 months of plagues that stood nature on its head. Hashem systematically destroyed the Yidden's tormentors in the most miraculous ways possible. Weren't the Yidden completely convinced of Hashem's absolute might and complete control, not to mention His love for His people? Did anyone doubt for a moment that Hashem could free them from their evil taskmasters and take them out of Mitzrayim? But beyond that, why did they want to stay? Depicting their lives as unabated absolute misery is insufficient. Incessant backbreaking labor in the hot sun, suffering regular beatings, watching their families and future becoming decimated as their children were being murdered right in front of their eyes, and no hope of ever escaping from under the heel of this most powerful nation on earth. Would anyone but deranged masochists want to stay? What is this all about? If we look further into the Medrash, we find the answer. Chazal tell us that Hashem looked deeply into their hearts and saw that although they desired to leave, that desire wasn't that strong. They weren't dying to go. But how could that be? How could they possibly prefer this Gehenna of being slaves in Egypt to Geula? Rav Chatzkel Levenstein Zatzal advised us not to jump to conclusions. Before we judge them, we need to better understand their choices. On the one hand, by staying, they would continue to live a life of unfathomable misery. Yet it was a misery that they knew. It was predictable. Following Hashem out of Mitzrayim was walking into the desert, into the unknown, and it required absolute trust in Hashem. Think about it. The thought of millions of people walking into a desert with no water, no food, and no shelter was unconscionable. How were they supposed to live? Their only hope was that they would be taken care of through incessant miracles. Remember, the plagues were not continuous miracles, and the Jewish people's moment-to-moment existence didn't depend on them. Although miracles appeared often, daily life still had the ring of being natural. Following Hashem out of Mitzrayim without any comprehensible plan was another matter entirely. The second option was to end their misery. But the caveat was that they needed to have incredible betochen in Hashem's miraculous involvement in every second of their lives in order to survive. This was something they never experienced nor ever even saw. The Navi relates to us that this second option of following Hashem blindly into the desert wasn't so simple at all. Yirmiyahu Navi tells the Jewish people, B'Shem Hashem, Zacharti lo chesed araich, aves kolosayich lechti, acharei b'midbar be'eretz lo zerua. Hashem remember the kindness of your youth, leaving Egypt, the love you displayed for me by going into the wilderness, a barren land. If the choice was so clear and simple, then why did Hashem laud the Jewish people so? Must be that being Moser Nefesh by following Hashem to the bed wasn't so easy at all. Thus, it was entirely worthy of Hashem's praise. So these were the two options, and only 20% chose to leave. completely trusting that Hashem would be performing miracles for them every single moment, indefinitely. But based on what we just explained, it seems that the Nisoyan, their test, was one of betochen. Could they completely trust Hashem to take care of them in the barren desert? The Medrash, however, says that their failure was that they had insufficient desire to leave. Betochen is one thing. Desire is something else completely. In digging deeper into this Medrash, it seems that Chazal are teaching us a compelling yesod. Betochen in the Geula has its limits. To reach the madrega betochen that this extremely difficult decision required, that betochen needed to be grounded in unbridled desire. In other words, the Yidden needed to abandon any other desire, such as the desire to remain in the secure, predictable, albeit miserable place, and yearn with their entire being for the Geula and the Geula alone. This desire for Geula would be able to unleash the betochen that was buried deep within their hearts and was required for them actually to walk out. But we're wanting the Geula because we want to be part of it. We don't want to be left out, chas v'sholem. It's certainly ample reason for us to desire deep within our hearts. Desiring Geula actually goes far beyond that. Chazal teaches that desiring Geula is actually a force to make it happen. The Medrash in Parshas Vayechi tells us, Hakol b'kivui. Everything comes through hoping and longing. The Nezer HaKodesh explains that although a person isn't worthy, nevertheless he can be zoicha to all the matanos through kivui, his hoping and longing for them. When he genuinely says, I long for Yeshua Hashem, despite being unworthy of that Geula, Yeshua nonetheless comes from that yearning itself. Longing for the Yeshua so deeply has the capacity, Ma'or Hashem, His Rachmanis, to fulfill our desire and give it to us. The Chavetz Chaim Zatzal Israel illustrates this powerful yesod with the following Maisa. After serving as the Rav in Warsaw, the Beis Halevi was resolute that he didn't want to take another position as Rav of a city. A delegation came to him from the town of Brisk to ask him to become their Rav. He refused. When they told him the 25,000 Yidden were waiting for him to become their Rav, the Beis Halevi relented and decided they couldn't let so many people down. So he conceded to take the Rabbanis. Hashem Yisborach is no different. He wants us to long for that Geula because he wants to bring it. Now that we know that yearning for Moshiach is so central to the Geula itself, the next step is to learn how we can increase that longing. Increase that longing so we can actually trigger the Geula to come. And there are two dimensions of this. First of all, how do we build the desire within ourselves? And secondly, how to leverage the hashgocha in our lives to unleash that desire that actually resides deep within us. The upcoming episodes will be devoted to this crucial avodah.